Okay, so I make it pretty much 9 o'clock in the morning, so we'll get started. So thank you for joining us on our first Latimer Core workshop. So I'm Laurence, I'm from the Natural History Museum. I've been working with some of the folk from the Latimer Core working group to put together a workshop, but the brains behind this are really Matt and Ben. Ben, would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ben Norton, and I was the review manager for Latimer Core, and now I'm part of the Latimer Core maintenance group.
And I'd also like to thank Shelley as well, who has actually run through, was one of our beta testers for this, so might be able to answer some questions and help folk in the room as we go through some of the exercises. But yeah, this is our first one, so it might be a little rough around the edges. All of the workshop links and content are available in a Zenodo lesson, so that link in the bottom corner, which I'll also share again at the end, and when we get into the actual content, there'll be a QR code on all of the slides, so you can open that up. So anything that we cover today, including the presentation, will be available. So if you don't manage to finish everything, or you kind of want to do it on 2 screens in your own time, absolutely fine. All of the content is there for you. Or if you want to share it with some colleagues afterwards. So what I'm going to go through today is a bit of how this fits into some of the work within Disco Transition, an overview of Latimer Core, some applications of Latimer Core, so current ones and kind of in progress ones, mostly NHM, but a few other examples. Then some orientation and exercises so you get familiar with the data standard, a little bit of discussion and feedback, and then some links to resources and acknowledgements. So yeah, I'm hoping that you'll understand how Latimer Core can be used and how you guys might want to use it. More familiarity with the data structure is more complicated than Darwin Core, but hopefully you'll get an idea about how it all fits together. If you want, you'll be able to create your own Latimer Core dataset today and continue to edit it after the workshop. Give us some feedback on how we can support you in implementing this standard within your institutions or for yourselves. And also just a little nod on how you can participate in standards development in Tadwig as well. So I'm here today thanks to the Disco Transition Project. So DISCO stands for the Distributed System of Scientific Collections, and it's a pan-European research infrastructure initiative. And DISCO is aiming to bring together 75 museums, botanical gardens, universities, and research institutes across Europe and make these digitally open and accessible for all forms of research and innovation. DISCO Transition is an EC-funded project, and it supports the establishment of this distributed infrastructure. And part of that project's work is to support collaboration and development on data standards, including the Open Digital Specimen, Latimer Core, and MIDS, the Minimum Information About Digital Specimen. So that's why I'm here today. So a brief overview of Latimer Core. So digitization and publishing of museum specimen data is happening worldwide. We've had a lot of good talks about that this week. And while many museums are actively engaged in specimen-level digitization, others have still yet to begin. And information about what collections hold is needed by a lot of stakeholders, and having a rough idea of our holdings is pretty important in terms of prioritizing specimen-level digitization. So if we can provide this information at higher levels and sharing what we know about our holdings on a collections level, that's kind of an easier aim than kind of doing specimen level digitization. So digitized specimens at the individual level are just the tip of the iceberg, really. Collections data, as they are at the moment, are still pretty sparse. There's kind of, before now, no high-level data standard. Everything is kind of text-based. There's very little structure and a lack of standardization. So Latimer Core was really developed to address or create a kind of standardized approach to link, describe, structure, and increase discoverability of collections above the specimen level. So, and there's quite a lot of different reasons that you would want to describe a collection. So they can be used for a whole bunch of strategic planning reasons. So we collect information to kind of plan digitization projects and large-scale moves. For collections discovery, so again, if we're thinking about institutional portals, like not everyone wants to come in and just see a specimen. They want to discover collections about particular people or from particular places or large groups of taxa and understand the holdings and the history. So collections discovery. For collections management, so if you're kind of doing conservation assessments across them or thinking about the different risks that our collections have, how do we model that in aggregate? Again, similar kind of things in inventory, how we link things together. So we've got a lot of data about the provenance of collections. If you're thinking about acquisitions, for example, how you associate that structured data. Thinking about how you consider impact in museums, in tours in particular collections. Again, thinking about applying impact and engagement metrics across whole collections. Thinking about how you pull data together and think about how you prioritize particular collections, where you're going to collect, where your strengths and weaknesses are. And again, who manages different bits of the collections at that high level as well, so that institutional information. So again, we've kind of talked about some of the existing challenges briefly, but there was no kind of standardization in terms of information, like how we model this kind of information. And while there are a few places and some notable exceptions, there's not much interoperability on this kind of high-level collections data at the moment. I'd say over the past 10 years, a few of us have seen a lot of surveys to collect high-level collections data, at least in Europe, and there's been a lot of duplication in effort in that survey data. So can we reduce that? Can we standardize that and bring that together in a similar way? And again, in institutions, people have limited time to do these kind of big audits, so you kind of want to do that once and then be able to update it. And then again, having a standardized format that is publishable and shareable, it creates a bit more of an incentive for people to have citable data. And again, same with sustainability. If we've got a kind of single standard that can be used across multiple institutions and global initiatives, it makes it a lot more sustainable. So, what is Latimer Core? It is a standard for collections descriptions. So it can describe any group of objects. So it could be the objects in a drawer, or a lot, the objects in a jar. Or it could also be the entirety of a collection. So it could be all of our 80 million specimens. Latimer Core is very flexible in the kind of scope of object groups that it can describe. It also has been built with a lot of different use cases. So it could be used for kind of covering acquisitions. It could be used for like doing conservation assessments and preparation prior to a large-scale digitization project or a large-scale move. And it's named after Marjorie Courtenay Latimer. She was a museum curator in South Africa, and her kind of scientific significance was bringing the coelacanth to the attention of the world. So yeah, the standard is named after her. So I think most folk here probably know what a data standard is, but it's a kind of common set of defined terms, usually with controlled vocabularies, and this allows us to exchange data in a common way that is both human and machine readable. Brief history of Latimer Core. So it's been, I'd say the development of this data standard has been fairly protracted. So we've been having conversations about data standards that would describe collections for not quite 20 years, but coming up to it. So the Natural Collections Description Standard kind of kicked off in 2008. But it wasn't until, I'd say, 2018 that kind of current work started, and then it took a good 4 years to get that data standard into shape. Then a review process, which Ben, who for those of us who have joined, is with us virtually but able to talk. And then we had an open community review last year, and Latimer Core was ratified earlier this year. So one of the key concepts with Latimer Core is understanding what we mean by object group. So as the name suggests, this represents the concept of a collection of objects, but in the sense that depending on the use case, it could represent more than one collection of objects. So from, again, an entire collection to a few objects in a drawer. And the object group concept is represented or has a number of properties. So these can be broadly divided into ones which describe the group as a whole, such as its name, description, conditions of access, and those which describe the properties of the objects within the group. So for example, the type of object and the preservation method. So it's quite a rich thing. So positioning that within, apologies. So within the wider standard, we're adding a richer set of descriptors in the form of classes that describe the more complex characteristics of the objects in the object group. So this includes things like taxonomy and stratigraphy. And we've also got classes which represent concepts like custodianship and organizational unit within the organization. So you can model quite a lot of detail in Latimer Core in terms of representing object groups. And there's quite a lot of crossover with some of the existing standards as well. So for example, measurement or fact, which is present in Darwin Core and ABCD, that's to support quite flexible textual narratives, as well as some quantitative metrics as well, if you need to use them in describing collections. And then there's a few specific classes that describe the structure and description of data in the Latimer Core record itself. Just adjusting something here. There we go. So Latimer Core can be used in a few different situations. So when you need to store structured data about groups of collection objects. So again, this could be used for providing information to aggregators like GRCycle. So I'll come back to GRCycle a bit later. And good to see some GBIF people in the room. Hopefully you've been to, have you already? Cool, awesome. So you can do. Nice. So yeah, GRCycle I think will probably be most folks' first interaction with kind of thinking about structured collections data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the talk. But yeah, whenever you need to think about groups of objects and the information and processes around them, even if you're not using Latimer Core directly, I think some of the concepts in this model are quite useful for thinking about the kind of data that you would want to store. So again, thinking about data about disciplinary collections, thematic collections, lots, contents of storage units, and related concepts. So thinking about what objects can be and how they interact and how to describe them, if you think of a use case that you have for recording information about groups, you should be able to define the information or the kind of use case in the Latimer Core schema. It's very flexible. And we don't imagine that like when you kind of come and use Latimer Core, that you'll use everything in it. You'll use a subset of those terms. And I'll give an example a bit later on about what we've used to describe a large 600,000 specimen Coleoptera collection that we're about to digitize. That's also the example that we've provided for you that can be used. So you'll be able to create copies of that and have a look at it and give it a good poke. But yeah, There's also a maintenance group that you'll be able to contact. So if you've got any questions, so in addition to Ben, after this workshop, we're hoping to put together a few more sessions and would be very grateful for your feedback on how we can support you more. So I wanted to just have a bit of autoplay. I'll just run through. Actually, Ben, is there anything that you wanted to add to what I said for the initial intro on Latimer core?
No, but I'm gonna send you a quick diagram here in about 2 minutes. It's just a quick summary of, and I can explain it. You have a bird collection. It's got 21,000 records. It's got 20,500 country values, but only 44 of those are unique. The Latimer core component is the 44 unique values because it provides, oh, look, I got a camera. It provides a spatial coverage for the whole collection. So you don't care about the 20,500 for each occurrence, right? You just care about the fact that there's 44 unique records because that defines the country spatial scope of the collection. And sort of like the distinction between object level data and collection level data. And Latimer core is that collection level data.
Cool, thanks, Ben. And thanks, guys. Great to see Ben on the screen.
That's cool, that's cool.
So I wanted to go through a few examples because it's all well and good kind of talking about a standard, but the important things are thinking about how it's actually used. So I can't remember whether we've got any talks here about NHM Unlocked, but apologies if we do. But very briefly, so I think this is one of the largest collection moves ever done of natural science collections. So as Rod mentioned on Monday, we've got a big project to build a new offsite storage. We're going to be moving 38 million specimens. 28 of those are moving to this new site and 10 million are moving internally. So we've digitized around 6 million of our 80 million specimens. So a lot of these 38 million have no digital record at the moment. So we've been using part of Latimer core to represent the contents of the drawers, the shelves, the tanks that will be moving. And a key part of this was recording volumetric data or footprint data. So again, this was not thinking so much about a kind of research focus. This was very much curation and management focus. And I know there's a few folk in the room that are kind of thinking about like large scale projects. So again, it's been incredibly useful for this. So doing that kind of modeling and thinking about, storage location as well, incredibly handy. And as you'll see in the example later, we can have quite like hierarchical storage information. So you can see exactly where those object groups are. And also have metrics on occupancy, so how full is a drawer or a cabinet or a jar. So again, really useful information to capture for modeling space if you're moving collections and planning and tracking large scale moves as well. So again, I think there was quite a lot of coverage on this yesterday, so I won't go into too much detail. So we're developing a new collection management system, and we're intending on implementing Latimer core in this for various object group use cases. So we've started, or for a few years, we've been experimenting with drawer level digitization, but we don't really have good representation in the CMS for that kind of data. But with Latimer core, we can digitize a drawer, which is a lot quicker than digitizing individual pinned insects, and capture some high level information about that in a good structured way. Our registers or collection indexes have high level information. Again, there were some good talks yesterday about acquisitions. So again, you could use Latimer core to capture structured information about an acquisition because you usually know who, you've got a reasonable idea of geographic coverage and at least some high level information about taxonomy. So you'd be able to store that in a structured way. Again, potentially with associating permit data with potential groups in that. So again, Latimer core would be able to represent that. and also describe key collecting events within a collection as well. So again, a lot of it's very flexible in how we can describe different things. Another large-scale institutional thing that we've been doing, this was based on a process the Smithsonian developed, I think, around 10 years ago, but a whole-level collections audit. So this covers all of our collections, including library and archives as well, and splits the collections into, I guess, they're curatorial management groups. So divides the collection into 3,000, thinks about the object types, the storage room, the taxonomy, stratigraphy, and we do various kinds of curatorial assessments on the utility of the collections, how digitized they are. So again, it gives us a good strategic and operational kind of tool to use in terms of thinking about the collections. And whilst this isn't in Latimer Core format at the moment, we're currently porting this into Latimer Core. So I think that would be really handy. So again, already mentioned this, but our data portal at the moment, the entry point for everyone is usually specimens. So sometimes we have digitized project data sets that you can go into, but for the collections as a whole, you generally just go in on specimen level. So we're kind of planning to use Latimer Core to give users a new way of browsing the collection. So if you're thinking about like the herbarium, for example, you can't drill in and look at the different synoptic collections in the herbarium, the key collectors, like descriptions about how our herbarium is structured. So we've got kind of world collection, Europe, UK, we've got the cryptogrammic herbarium as well. But that kind of, for the folk that use the herbarium, that kind of structure is not represented in the data portal. So how you traditionally use collections, kind of going in and navigating them, it's not really represented. So we'd be able to use Latimer Core to provide a much richer structured way for people to have different entry points to browsing collections data. And then finally, one of the neat things as well, so DISCO's starting to have a few national digitization or collections-based programs that are coming together. We wanted to give a shout out to DISCO Flanders. So they've been using, so they're the Flemish node of the DISCO research infrastructure. Got a very mixed consortium of collections, so botanic gardens, museums, and research institutions. And again, similar kind of problem. You don't have specimen level data for most of these collections. And they used Latimer Core to describe collections above the specimen level. They collected data via spreadsheets, so you don't have to have a kind of fancy database to collect Latimer Core, but it does kind of help. Spreadsheet wrangling is an art in and of itself. But then using this data, putting it into a database, and then using it to create dashboards. And that's a really effective way of kind of working with stakeholders and kind of thinking about how we do like large-scale national planning, so starting to pull this data together. And we're intending on using a similar approach in the UK for UK-based collections. And again, it means that every collection can be represented digitally with, you know, a reasonable amount of effort. So you can get a dot on the map, you can understand the collections, you can kind of go in and do an audit in a day and get a collection and some key information. So again, it's really handy for this kind of work. So again, we've done a few shout outs to some large scale initiatives. So GeoCycle have been really great for us in our national program. So we're putting a lot of high level collections data into GeoCycle for all of the UK collections. I think we've got over 100 now. And the intention for GeoCycle is to implement at least some of Latimer Core. It's already implemented. It's an old slide. This was from earlier in the call. So Latimer Core is already implemented in GR-Cycle, and Disco is also aiming to use Latimer Core for creating structured information and also for kind of programmatic strategic planning about how we're prioritizing digitization and research across Europe. So, the exciting part. So my intention today was to get you all to have a little play with Latimer Core. And I was thinking in bed late last night that when I did this, or when I did the run through myself, I was doing this at 2 screens on my desk at home. So I'm going to attempt to run through this with you in person, but can I just have a show of hands who is thinking about actually giving this a go right now on their laptop?
Be ambitious.
All right. Okay, so Ben, that's like 4 hands in the room.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
I'll probably go through and do a live demo. Oh, in fact, actually, I'm thinking, Ben, you've got 2 screens, right?
I have 3.
3 screens.
Yeah. One of them's curved. I know, but I had the same thing with 2 screens with this. In fact, I was doing it. It was pretty nice to have 2 screens. But yeah.
Would you be willing to do a screen share and run through some of the tasks and talk actually?
All right.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll do an intro to Airtable, so you can have a few minutes to get set up. Cool. Thanks, Ben.
That'll be enough.
Cool. Again, I'll make sure that all of you guys have the links to the content afterwards, because when I was looking around, I thought probably that would be the way that things went this morning. So we are using a bit of or a cloud platform called Airtable. So if you've not used it before, I would recommend checking it out. It is really, really cool. So it's kind of somewhere in between a spreadsheet and a database. So you can create multiple databases they're called bases in Airtable. And you can create tables within these bases and link them together and create fields of defined data types, including formula and a whole bunch of like snazzy functions. You can create relationships between those tables. So it feels a lot like Google Sheets, but it kind of creates neat forms on top of all of the data and links things together. I've used it for mapping survey data kind of as a light like customer relationship management type thing. It's really, really cool. So you get that spreadsheet-like feel, but also having like database-like functionality. So it is really good for Latimer Core. So yeah. Because Latimer Core is a lot more structured than Darwin Core, we needed something that could show you that structure and have forms. So it's not a very flat data standard, although Matt has kindly made a flattener, so we can export Latimer Core as well. But really, Latimer Core is a structured data standard, so it really should be kind of more databasey. So I'm just having a look at my notes. So yeah, the only limitation with Airtable is that it is really a paid bit of software. So there are quite, you can only have 1,000 records per base in the kind of free version. That's enough to kind of experiment and do a bit of kind of experimentation with Latimer Core, but you'll probably, if you were going to use it to do a lot of modeling, you'd probably need to pay for it. But yeah, so any significant size Latimer Core, you'd need to pay for it. We are exploring other options as well. So there's a few open source examples, so like alternatives to Airtable. But yeah, this is the easiest way for you to all start playing with it. What about it?
Well, because in the implementation in GR cycle can be done with the content with the Latimer standard, but it's structured as a JSON file.
Uh-huh.
So I was wondering, is that something you would recommend? Oh, sorry. Hello. Hi. Thank you. So my question is, because I think, how does it work for you at the museum? Like, how do you store this? Because Latimer core is so hierarchical, in the way we have currently implemented it in GR cycle, you can access GR cycle content formatted as Latimer core, and it's formatted in a JSON structure so that it can have all the nested values. And so I was wondering, like, it looks like this is quite more like a table. And I was wondering, is this stored as a relational database, or?
I'm pretty sure in Airtable you can export as JSON as well. So like JSON would make sense for storing that hierarchical data. Matt built the flattener just so that it was easier for people to get that into a spreadsheet, just to have a look at it. But it is quite ugly looking at the nested data in a CSV. Because you get a lot of repetition. But it's just to kind of so you can look at it more easily in Excel.
Okay. Yeah, but that makes sense. But I just was wondering. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Cool. And then I think one more slide before I'll kind of hand you over to Ben. So the example that we've used, like Latimer core is pretty rich, but what we've prototyped it or kind of had our first experimental data set was on a collection of about 600,000 British and Irish beetles. So these are all of the things that we've kind of got in there at the moment. So if we go around like a clock, so this Latimer core scheme could also be called kind of like digitization audits. So again, this kind of format is probably what we would use, knocking things over, what we would use for quite a lot of our digitization projects. You can also see the license as well. You've got a resource relationship there. Then we've got measurement of fact. So you can see that we've got a draw count, which I think is an undercount, 49 draws. Does that seem about right? I think there's, but then we've got storage location, which is hierarchical. So we can see a room in a particular cabinet. Actually, no, this is right because it is just one family, I think. So that is right. So 49 draws of Carabidae. And in this one as well, we've also got a reference to multimedia. So we've got a photo of the drawers within this collection. And then we've got a couple of roles within this. So we've got the digitizer who went through and did the audit information, which was Pete Wing and his ORCID. We've got the curator who works within this organizational unit. So that's Max Barkley, his role. Then we've got the taxonomic group represented in this and linked to Catalogue of Life's taxon ID. The region of the world represented by this collection, and then an event. So like many entomological collections, that this collection was converted from solid cork bottom drawers to cork slats, and that's still in progress. But what we would be able to do is talk about the time period when this curatorial event occurred. And again, I think many of you would think in a lot of collections it would be really handy to know when certain interventions had happened in the past, or be able to record that in a structured way. So we have prepared 2 example Latimer core bases for you. So a general kind of template, and then this example that is filled with all of the Coleoptera data, because again, if you want to see how something is used, it is really nice to see it filled with actual data being used for a real project. But at that point, I will hand over to Ben. So can we get Ben back on screen again, please? Cool. And are you ready to do a screen share, Ben? And thank you, tech team, for getting him up. Oh, can't hear you at the moment, Ben.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay. There's a delay. This is interesting. This is sort of an odd. Okay. All right. So does everyone have, there's a Google Doc that's linked. I'll share my screen here. Let me just get it real
I'll
quick.
just check with the, so everyone who is actually going to try and work through, have you got the materials up? Is anyone, no, okay. Give me a moment.
Sure.
Sorry, can you just put me back on again? Current slide. There we go. So this should get you to the orientation and exercises document.
I also linked it in the chat window.
Oh yeah, so should have used a better font. Oh yeah, so also a link in chat. Have you got that? Has anyone not got that wants it? L for Lima. D, yeah, DJLB. My apologies, it's such a dreadful font. Okay, anyone looking want that has not got it yet? Otherwise, I'll switch over to Ben. I'm taking the silence as acquiescence. So, okay, may I have Ben again? Okay, Ben, you are live.
And I'll tell, I work with kids a lot, and when I talk too fast, I ask them to raise their hand, and I'll slow down. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but I'm gonna do my best to take it slow. All right.
I'll keep an eye out for you, Ben.
Thanks, man. All right, so I'm gonna start on the third page, which, in fact, what I'll do is I'll share my screen. All right, let's see. Screen one, here we go. All right, here we are. So the getting started here. Before though, I want to do a quick diagram to sort of bring this in. Let me see if I can, here we go. So real quick, can everybody see the diagram?
Can you zoom in a bit, Ben?
Yes,
like a lot. Yeah. Yeah.
How
that's
about now? Probably
a bit more. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Okay. So we have a bird collection database, just in general, right? So everybody's museum has one. We map it to Darwin Core for publication. Standard workflow. We all understand this. So we have a database, data set that has 21,000 records of birds. I'll zoom in a little bit more, but there. Within that data set, and I know I just mentioned this, but I just want to repeat it. There are 20,964 country values. That's a record with anything in the country field. So, right. If I run a quick summary, there are actually 44 unique values in that country. Now, it's not data quality. I'm just going by just raw counts. For state province, 19,648, and there are 126 unique values. If I want to communicate, if someone comes to me and says, okay, what's the spatial coverage of your bird collection? That's where Latimer Core comes in, because it provides that information. I can pull up a Latimer Core record and it shows it. And so here, now if I look at the Darwin Core record, this is what matters, right? 20,964, every occurrence. Most occurrences have a country, we might think about, right? And most occurrences have a state province, which is great, right? But that's not concerned for Latimer Core. I want the spatial coverage. This is what you pull out. And this is when you generate a Latimer Core record, this is like the information you will pull out of a collections data set. Does that make sense? We get a lot of questions about this. This diagram has been in my head for like 2 months, and I just finally got it on a diagram. So is everybody on the same page with this?
I see nodding heads, Ben.
Okay, fantastic.
Or at least half of them are nodding.
So that's essentially what a lot of this is. If you think about it, there's a lot here. Airtable is really nice. Airtable is basically an extension of Excel meant for hidden relational modeling, because you can't really this big hurdle that we have of going from flat files to hierarchical files is a very tall, steep mountain to climb. And Airtables is one of these nice things where it starts to blend the two. So it's like it's moving the right direction to have nested JSON and nested relational models, but not fully where it just overwhelms people. And it's pretty popular and it's a nice interface. And so that's what this is. So this is essentially each class, in a sense, would be its own table in a relational model. And during the expert review, 90% of questions we received were about implementation. How would you build a database like this? How would you enter data into this? Those kinds of questions. That's intentionally outside the scope of review process. And so we didn't answer them because until it's ratified, and there's another standard that has this issue right now, and that's why I don't talk about mineralogy extension right now too, is because anything can change until it's ratified, right? So don't build anything with it until we're done, because otherwise things change and things can happen, and it's sort of a runaway snowball effect. And so that's why I'm not presenting on mineralogy extension, because I don't want anybody to use it at this time. Next year, I would appreciate touch on it. But at any rate, so now these questions are the forefront. How do we do this? And so we needed a quick way to put this in a presentation to show it, and Airtable is a great quick way of doing that. So there are a lot of tables here. If you imagine each one of these tabs is a table, and it's a summary of information in a larger database.
Can you just read out some of the tab names, Ben, because they're quite hard to see?
Yes. Watch this.
We've got, if you can zoom in, more, that's good.
So we've got geographic context, identifier. You'll recognize a lot of these are associated with Darwin Core. There are a lot of Darwin Core crossover fields into Latimer Core intentionally. Just like state, province, and country, both of those terms are borrowed from Darwin Core into Latimer Core. But collection status history, event, geographic context. Let's go over organizational unit. It's got how people organize the institution, the curators, the institution address, that sort of collection level information. People associated with the collection, role, resource, relationship.
We've got a question, Ben.
Sorry, interrupting. I have a question. So
Yes.
when you have things that are from other standards like Latimer Core or measurement of facts,
Yes.
how is there like anything you need to do to specify that the term is not Latimer Core and comes from something else? Like a way of showing it in the standard? Like, you know what I mean? Or do you just use whatever terms from other standards?
Oh, so like here on the diagram, I've got, if I were just to see DWC country, how would I know this is a DWC country in Latimer Core, or is it a DWC country in Darwin Core? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
I can see you put DWC country, but that's how you would show it in Latimer Core, right?
That's
you
exactly
show
right.
the provenance. Okay, great, thank you.
Right. So the name.
Yeah, so the namespace is in Latimer Core, like if it's from another standard.
Good. And it's exact
That was my
matches
question.
too.
Yeah.
And
So
if it's
you just put DWC, and then for Latimer Core you just assume it's Latimer Core, so you don't put LtC, or you put LtC also.
LtC would only be for terms unique to Latimer Core. If it's an
Okay.
exact match, it's borrowed over. And that's the nice thing. They're all exact matches. This was big during the review, that if you're going to borrow a term, it's got to be transitive. It's got to, A equals B, B equals C, A equals C kind of thing. And
How do you do for measurement of facts? Is it because it's an extension?
It's the same. It's still
LtC?
I'm not sure. Hold on. I'll tell you. I have it open.
It's a very specific question, but it's because we have implemented that in GR cycle, and so I just want to make sure that we implemented it right. Maybe I should have checked with someone before.
So it's LtC, and the reason is I think it's because at the collection level, and the name was changed to scheme measurement effect, because it's a measurement effect about the collection, the scheme itself, not the object, and so that differentiation.
That's great. That's fine.
sense?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Anybody else have questions?
But yeah, quite happy for folk to kind of come up and ask questions to the mic. So I'll let Ben know if.
I thought I was just going to answer questions in chat. This is going to be easy. So anyways, so can everybody, has everybody in the room actually found this page, the blue page, is able to?
I think the folk that are working through, so Ben, we're in a room that's mostly chairs in a room. So there's a few folk that are kind of perched their laptops on their knees, but it's not like a room with tables, which is why I've asked you to kind of run through things.
That's unfortunate. It's just, it's like a picnic lunch. So that's the gist of it. Now the question then becomes, how do you go from your collection database and your collection system to Latimer Core? Technically, it's not super complicated. I mean, I can run a query in SQL to get those numbers pretty quick and then just spit it out into a schema. We have yet to have a real, I attempted it, but it failed in a magnificent manner, to create a database schema for people, just a basic SQL standardized schema where people can just build a database for Latimer Core. But you still have to have that transformation basically from the Darwin Core record to a Latimer Core, that migration process. And so that doesn't exist yet. And we're hoping and we're building it, the flattener, and there are some technologies coming out. MIDS is getting involved with it. So we're hoping to have more participation, but that's the next iteration after ratification, as people actually start using it and understanding it. And so can everybody think about this in their own terms of their own collection? Can you visualize how your collection might be put into a Latimer Core record?
There's some nodding in the room.
Ask me. All right. So that's the gist of it. Anybody have any other questions or?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to sound naive, but is this for collections that are static collections that are completed?
No.
So there's a live link up between your Latimer Core and your collection. So
yes.
Whenever you update the collection, this has to update your Latimer Core. So it's not just a static record.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but your collection could be composed of multiple records. So if say we've had a bequeathment, someone's died, left us 100,000 pinned insects, we could create a Latimer Core record for that acquisition before it's been fully incorporated in a collection. We go out and we go and do some field work, and we've got a rough idea of what's in that, the malaise trap samples and things like that. You create a Latimer Core record for that before it gets integrated into the main collection. Or you kind of go through and you're kind of conserving things, moving stuff from cork bottom drawers into plastozote drawers. All of that can be represented in Latimer Core. So it's intended to be used for dynamic collections as well as, static collections.
So the Latimer Core that you're making is fed from your collections management system?
Yes.
No. Well, in theory, but no collection management system has implemented Latimer Core as a data standard yet.
Okay. So you'd at the moment, whatever your collection management system, of which I think there's quite a few, aren't there? When you have to export it out into Latimer Core and then you share it, and every time you change the collection management collection, you have to export it again. That's where it's at the moment?
Kind of. So what you'd be able to do, so I think we're going to be building more tools, but a lot of the collection management systems can export in Darwin Core. You'd be able to use Darwin Core to create a Latimer Core data set. So you could go from specimen level to Latimer Core, like Ben just kind of showed with the bird data, where NHM will be implementing Latimer Core in our collection management system. So I guess some institutions, if they're thinking about implementation, they may use something like Airtable as an interim, depending on what CMS they're using and how easy it is for them to get that CMS provider to implement Latimer Core if it's something that they want. But this is a data standard that was only released in the public this year, so it's pretty new for a data standard.
You were saying that is it going to be existing as an SQL schema that you could just put into MySQL or anything like that? Is that something? Because it sounds like you've got tables and link-up tables and lookup tables.
Ben, do we have an SQL schema already?
Partial. I need to redo the one I've got. But yes, I mean the idea is that it may not. Some things may not exist, but it was designed intentionally where that's certainly possible. The concepts are there, importing it, mapping it. You don't have to go from your collection database here all the way to Latimer Core. You wouldn't do that. You can go from Darwin Core to Latimer Core, which lowers the barrier for getting a Latimer Core record, I think, substantially, because you already have the workflows here. You don't need to do them all over again, right? That barrier is too high for going for a whole nother. So here you would have another data mapping transformation that would go to Latimer Core. Not at all. And so once you get to Darwin Core, it should be fairly straightforward to go to Latimer Core. And it was designed intentionally to be. It looks daunting. It is a lot. And in review, we realized that asking people to review that many classes, it's fairly intimidating. And we hope that it once people understand sort of it's just a summary of what is in your collection, that barrier will sort of begin to sort of go down. And as long as we have tools to do that kind of stuff too. But just like in a Darwin Core record, every time I refresh this bird collection data set, let's say 3 months from now, I republish and it's got 22,000 records. Well, then that would then update my Latimer Core record for the collection. You could do it automatically. There's nothing, most of these things can be automated fairly easily. It's just, this is a one query and you're done. If you have a technical, even though, yeah, that's just it.
Cool. Anna Koivunen has a question.
Hi, I was just wondering how well this works with ABCD standard.
It's a great question. Part of it is the XML. ABCD is an XML, and that's probably the most problematic area for going from ABCD to Latimer Core is the structure of it. It's just like anything else. It's not like I'm sure you've heard that before. But that structure, the data is defined, it's structured, it's about collections, the terms are there, summarizing it. But going from XML to sort of this Latimer Core summary is difficult to do. So it's not a conceptual issue. The concepts are all there. It's a sort of data structural problem, which is just like it. There's lots of those types of things, right? And so that's the all these nested. I don't want to get too technical about it, but that's the biggest hurdle for going from ABCD to Latimer Core.
Got another question for you, Ben.
Yeah, it's not a question, but just a comment that around ABCD, the OpenDS schema for digital specimens uses both Darwin Core and ABCD's concepts. So once you get your data in there, and we can import data from ABCD, will be much easier to convert that data into Latimer Core.
And I thank you for extending that deadline, by the way, on the review. I appreciate it. Yeah, it looks really good. It's really comprehensive, and that bridge is just critical. If that's the bridge, that's all that's really needed is just getting it from one place to the other, right? And it can't go directly. There's got to be something in the middle. And if that does it, then that's absolutely fantastic.
Cool. We good to go back through orientation and exercises, Ben. So if you can go back to the table. So I think
Sure.
we'll go back to kind of the getting started and exploring. So actually keep that zoom level, I think, because your wide screen is very wide. I think we're possibly 4:3 aspect ratio in the room. Not sure, but
Here, I'm gonna switch screens to a resolution that's more. Let's do this.
That's good. Cool.
Much better. Okay.
So I think the first step that we were kind of going through in the exercise is just showing that you want to make a copy of the Airtable base. So Ben, if you could just copy this one, or have you already done that?
I have, but I can do it again. Let's do it. So, because we don't want to edit the original. And so my first workspace, just click add base. We don't need to fool with too many things. So edit. So you basically, just like at a Google Sheet, you've basically made a copy of a Google Sheet for your own purposes. It takes a minute.
So in the tutorial document, we've got 2 bases to copy. So there's this empty one, and there's a second populated one with data. And most of the exercises that we go through are for you guys to do in an empty base, with the idea that you can kind of create your own representation of one of your collections, a kind of sub-collection or a main collection. So I'm just having a look at
Yeah. So the go ahead.
So, oh, no, you go, Ben.
The first exercise is on page 12. So everybody can see my screen.
Mhm.
Right here. So creating a Latimer core schema record. So there are a few requirements for a Latimer core record. And we've got them on documentation pages too. And so I think this first exercise has to do with just fulfilling those requirements. So if I go to, I guess this starts with the
What is a
point, right?
good scheme name, Ben? Because I was wondering about this when I was thinking about naming a scheme. Yeah, so are there recommendations on good naming practices?
That's a great question.
Because was I right in thinking that if you're creating a scheme for doing, like, you'd use it to say, like, digitization audits or kind of pre-digitization assessments would be a scheme describing the purpose of the scheme for just capturing data, because you could use it for you'd use it multiple times for multiple object groups potentially.
It sounds good. It seems like, man, it's a heavy question. It seems small, but naming these things is really key because you want it to sort of be associated, like the bird collection. You want it to be associated with the bird collection, but not name the same thing, to create the distinction that there's a summary of it at a higher level. It's really good. I don't have
Because I
an
kind
answer
of got stuck on that when I was thinking, okay, what's the difference between those two things?
Can I ask a question too? Are you sharing the schemes? I mean, can multiple people within your organization access the scheme and or the Airtable to be working in the same space?
Yes, they can. So, but again, with Airtable, so if you're using the free version, I think it's only one editor on a base. Is that right, Ben? So if you're kind of copying it locally, yeah. So for this exercise, if you're using the free version, only you'll be able to edit it. But if you have paid accounts, multiple people can edit the same base at the same time.
Think of it like Google Sheets. You can sort of commenters and things like that. So where is, all right. To get it from, help me here, Laurence, to create the interface for creating, are we using the
I was just
example
getting a
or a blank?
notepad out of my bag. We were using the blank one to go through,
Right.
but that was a useful question.
There it is. Great. It's hard with this.
Yeah, so this is the blank one. So yeah, so first thing was specifying the scheme name.
This is what, I should have editing rights.
Maybe drawing a schematic before you go in and start naming things is a good way to do it. Sketch it out, like here's generally what the structure is going to look like, and then you can come up with a scheme name after.
Yeah, that's probably a sensible approach. So with this one, we were kind of assuming that it would be similar to like a general overview of the collection, so similar to what we did for the British and Irish Coleoptera collection. Just because if we were going through all of the different options, there's a lot to think about.
But I think that
Here we are.
schematic that Ben showed us, that's where you would start to think about.
Yeah, so if you were thinking about, yeah, I would recommend if you were going to use it for real, definitely do a modeling exercise.
And it would make sense that one of the things we do as a maintenance group this year is to talk about sort of best practices for starting this. Like, what do we call it? Right. So I'm going to use my bird example and just call it the bird collection LtC scheme, which I would not do normally, but all right, let's call it this. So bird collection Latimer core scheme, right? Has identifier. Go ahead. So this might be the collection code. And so this was, let's call it CSN bird. So this is how it's registered with when you publish the Darwin Core datasets IPT.
Bigger?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this is the collection code for the collection, right? So collection, so that's what is it? DWC collection code. So that's the identifier. Am I missing something? I'll try to stay in this one. All right. So now we've got this has object group. Oh, so we have our bird collection Latimer core scheme. Now the object group, and I cannot remember why it's not called has collection, why it's called object group. There's a very good explanation for this. I think it was the first question that was asked during the expert review is why are you saying object group? But so what we're going to say is we'll say alternate collection name, we'll call it the Big Bird collection. And I'm not going to go to too many little details here. There we go.
Is that a big collection or a collection of big birds?
That's a great question. All right. There we go. All right. So we have our object group, and now this is where the relational part comes in this. What you'd really have, hold on, this whole, okay. McKenna, there we go. Thank you. All right. So this is where the relational model is. Typically what I'd like to do is probably go create my object group first and then link it accordingly instead of creating the object group here. But I can do that. And that's where Airtable is like this sort of Excel, but it allows you some relational functionality. So I've got my Big Bird collection. Whoops. So for those of you who just joined us, I was not exactly prepared to present this. All right, here we go. All right, so distinct objects, a scheme name. We've got our identifier. It's our collection code. Object group has a reference. You know, if there's a citation for that collection, where it might be, there's a DOI, for example, for the collection or whatever it may be. Has scheme measurement. This might be total number of records. So in our bird example, we had the 20,969. So we might say, let's go here and we'll add one. Let's say specimen count. And
yeah, so this is what Airtable looks like. So each of these forms can pull in data from multiple tables in the Airtable. So, and then again, you can kind of click through to other tables and forms when you're in a form, which is pretty neat. And it does all of that automatically, so you don't actually have to build those display forms yourself. They're built dynamically. Ben,
yes.
One of the things that's in the first step in the mandatory bit is
Yes.
Whether it's allowed for the same individual object to be included in more than one object group within the scheme. What examples of that are there? Like when would you have an object group, so an individual object included in more than one object group? Can you think of any use cases for that?
Yes. Let's say I'm a museum and I acquire a collection from a university in South Carolina. In fact, North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences did. They acquired 3 at one time. Those might have, let's say it's the Museum of Charleston. That may have a Latimer core schema already written when it was down in South Carolina. I'm going to take that and put it into my herpetology collection at Museum of Natural Sciences. So I'm integrating it. So, but I probably want to keep that Latimer score record to preserve the original context of that collection when it was acquired from South Carolina. So I've got the Latimer core record that describes just that component of the larger collection at the museum. And so in that sense, you would have, but those objects would get integrated and accessioned into the main herpetology collection. So in that sense, you would have a specimen member of both. Does that make sense? In a sense, that collection becomes a subset. And that also allows me to track in many ways how many of the specimens have been accessioned, how many have been databased once I acquired it, because you get the physical specimen, then it's about digitizing them into your own system, and allows me to capture statistics like that if they both have Latimer core schemes. Just basic raw counts. So that's how I would do it. And I could subdivide it based on whatever criteria I might want to do. I could do it by year. I could do it by, source if it was acquired as one big, acquisition and things like that. So that's where you would have that. This is tough because there's a lot of reasons why this field is there and why we had to make this distinction, because you don't want repeated things. And so, and they are two separate entities, but yes, a specimen can belong to two for sure, as you want to define them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So we've got a linked object group now. So next is adding a record level record, I think.
Yes. So record level. So derived collection, meaning we've sort of generated out of a larger collection, a license. So we want to publish this record. This is the record level, the record metadata. So let's do CC0. There we go. And rights, I think we're all familiar with these. Rights holder, let's say the big museum has a big bird collection. And the identifier, if we had it, whatever to, has object group. Yes, it does. It has the big bird collection. And then identifier record. Okay. So we're going to identify this Latimer core data set. Now we had NCMNS birds. So let's do, here we go.
Cool.
Yeah. Sound good?
Yeah. So now object group. Yeah. So building basic collection descriptions. So let me go back to our object group.
And it's right there. So
Yeah.
we created this as we were creating the other records, right? And so that little nested allows us. I'm missing my arrows here. Where's my little? It is interesting working in. Here we go.
So this covers, yeah, so we can then put in a bit more information here. So on that first row, you can put in the collection name. You can put in a brief description of the collection, information about types of material, preservation methods. So yeah, can you visualize that?
Yeah. So, and this one, let's get rid of, doesn't matter. So this is automatically calculated. So you have object groups on, which is nice. So like an Airtable, I can calculate it where I want to concatenate several fields in a certain way, and then that'll generate my object group summary for me, which then I can release for publication purposes, whatever I might want to do. So what was it you needed me to do?
Can you just open up an object group in form view?
Yes. Oh, here we go. How do you get to form view? Here we go. Oh, it's making me do upgrade.
No worries. Just go through line by line. But in
Here we go. There it is. So now I have my form view, alternate collection name, basis of object group, managed system. I think, was that Andy Bentley in the room? I think I heard him.
no, I don't think he's in the room. But again, many institutions have got like multiple collection management systems. So you can kind of say which CMS kind of covers this particular collection as well. Right. So there's a lot of, yeah.
And it forms a bit different. It's not as connected as the other ones. It looks like it's, oh, and then I can publish these. Here we go. You need to, for the form view, you need to create them ahead of time. So if you're in that grid view, you can create things on the fly as you're going through it. For form view, you need to create the options ahead of time. And speaking of which, this came up yesterday. Latimer Core makes recommendations of vocabularies. They are not requirements, nor are, it's half a recommendation to help facilitate data entry for people. Like, hey, okay, I see this term. The next step is, okay, what are we going to put in it? The recommended vocabularies are help to facilitate that. Like, hey, here's what we suggest. You don't have to use this, but this is what we suggest. At the same time, it also sort of provides another way to provide examples. Like, hey, when we mean this, when we say this term, this vocabulary is what we're talking about. So it helps also facilitate understanding. But you can add, what you want to, whatever works for your institution. There's no control over that. So anyway, so that's the actual, right?
We'd
It's a tenor
recommend
permit.
creating controlled vocabularies beforehand for some of these things as you're kind of going through and doing collection assessments. So again, as the comment we had before, thinking about the purpose that you would use, and then probably for a lot of these terms, you've already got some in your collection management system already. So you could kind of export them and pre-populate so that you've got that kind of linkage from the specimen level, or again, kind of like management level in your CMS. Yeah, so I think in the exercise, Ben, we'd got adding a taxon record and linking them to the object group.
So taxon.
Yeah, so again, when we've kind of created records in each of these tables, they would then appear in that form view that Ben was just showing.
So when do you create? Was this create
What's your favorite bird genus, Ben?
Accipiter cooperi. It's the only one I can remember. so let's just go with that. It's a Cooper sock. Species. And then if it has identifier, so I might have bird life, might have wherever I got it from. Here we go. Oh, cool. Okay, that's a little confusing about it. So the has identifier. So has identifier is repeated throughout Latimer core. For any class may have an identifier, and that gets very confusing. So here, we need to think through this, because what there's no clarity about which exactly identifier it's talking about. Like, is it talking about the taxon identifier? Or is it talking about relating it to the Latimer core scheme identifier? That's for another day. So at any rate, so that's how the reference, and I would have a reference for reference works the same way as well.
Cool. So if we go back to object view now, we should see that and go back to grid view. I thought it doesn't. Yeah.
Where would it be? Right.
Can you touch on that identifier issue again? So you can say that it has an identifier, but you have no idea what that identifier
That's an Airtable issue. So because we're using, so it's the identical term used in multiple places, but we've not got any filtering in Airtable to show that. So say we were just using catalogue of life identifiers on the taxon table, I think we would be able to put in a filter to kind of just filter that out. But at the moment, we've not got any filtering. So any identifier in that Airtable base will appear in any of those, for any of those terms, and it occurs in multiple places. Does that make sense?
Yes, but then how do you specify the identifier itself?
So how do you enter the identifier?
Well, yes.
Yeah.
How do you identify an identifier from one system as opposed to a different one? There is? Okay.
Right here.
You can use any identifier class that's from Darwin Core, that's in the course.
Okay.
Collection code or identifier.
Yeah, so you can specify identifier type. So so say you were using worms or another source for your names, you'd be able to specify the source, and in Airtable you'd be able to set up a filter for particular tables if you wanted to. Again, this is just because we've not set up any filters and we're just kind of doing stuff on the fly. Could you take the...
Sorry, maybe I'm getting a bit lost, but when you you did the object and you did like your big bird collection, presumably you're going to make like some hierarchy, you would have made a hierarchy of cabinet, drawer, and then that's where you're putting on your taxon for a particular drawer. Is that right? Am I following this correctly?
Yeah, or you can create, yes, or you can create nesting in the big bird collection. So like in the Coleoptera collection, the example record are the ground beetles, the Carabidae, which are part of a larger collection.
Okay, so the object group is like following the structure of the actual physical archive, like
Yes,
the original thing. So it was cabinet and then
Yeah.
drawer or whatever it is. In
and
the
an
collection.
object group can be part of an object group.
Okay, and you can make as many object groups as you want, so because they're all different on every collection.
Exactly.
Okay. And where you're making those taxon, the taxon there, that you can then apply to a particular drawer or whatever level it is, and you could do geniuses for one cabinet or however the collection's structured. Is that right?
So like a storage configuration. That's a tough one because it's you could definitely do that. It would be complicated because you know what I mean? Because you're creating all these. If you have one big collection, you have the big bird collection. I've got 20 cabinets. Each cabinet has 6 drawers. I could create an object group for every one of those drawers. And then that's an object group, and that gets associated with a taxon that I've created over here. You could do that. And so you could leverage it for storage configuration purposes, which is actually a pretty cool use case. You could do that.
I'm just trying to get where you'd have one species to attach to a collection. Sorry, I'm just not following. Sorry.
Let's say I've got my collection of appetites, and I just really like appetites, and so I've got 100 appetites, and so that would be a classification of appetite for a mineral. Or let's say I really like Cooper's hawks, and so I'm museum, and all I have are Cooper's hawks. Then in a sense that would be one taxon. It's not very likely, but that's where you would have just one taxon. Does that make sense?
I'd say it's more likely that we'd have families or like, so it'd probably be higher taxa for collections.
Yeah. To express the coverage.
You can have several taxa for one object group, right?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. And when you have nested object group and you flatten you get your Latimer core. I like that term. So I guess each row is the smallest group, right? And then you have all the hierarchical information that's repeated. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. It's quite extensive when you flatten it.
Yeah, but I imagine that's what's going to be most commonly shared across platforms because that's. Yeah, but I mean, I don't see how.
I know.
Okay, we can maybe spend 5 minutes talking about implementation afterwards, but
I know.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I know.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I was just thinking, I'm just going to remind myself what else I was going to cover before the end. Okay. So I think, Ben, 5 more minutes. So in terms of like key things that you might want to show in terms of structure or any questions. So hopefully you've gleaned a bit about how Airtable kind of works and how you go through things. So I promise like the exercises make sense and you'll kind of like get something. Actually, Ben, have you got a copy of the British and Irish Coleoptera collection so we can just show a few rows?
I do, right here.
Cool.
Where'd you like me to go? Let's go. Here.
Cool. And then maybe could you just expand one of those? So this is where, can you all see that? So what we've entered in here are, so this is the family representation in the beetle collection. So if we scroll down, you can see we've got stuff for object types, preparation types, preservation method. And I think some of these, and if you click, you can click through to geographic context and that will take you to the record and you can see that there's more structured information in here. So again, in terms of stuff that you guys can play around with, this is there, and I think it makes a lot more sense to kind of look and touch, which is why we put this populated example together. If you just go back, Ben, and scroll down again. So again, this is, so And this is one of the measurement of facts. So if you open that one, you can see how we've used it. So in this particular one, we've used it for a draw count. We could also use this for occupancy. So if you were doing a kind of assessment for potential expansion pre-digitization, you could use this again for kind of having cabinet information. And yeah, you can see that we've got this linked to a particular storage location. So we were talking about storage before. So you can kind of, you'd be able to click on that storage location.
It went to a page. There we go.
Yeah.
It went to here.
Maybe that link
Oh.
doesn't work. Ah, I think
It
that
does.
link goes to the, okay.
I got it. You got to give me access. Well, let's move on.
Yeah.
To another table, another
Yeah.
base. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, so I'd recommend having a browse through that one to see how that data is structured, because there's a lot of stuff in there.
Could you maybe show how you can add an image to, for instance, a storage unit?
Yes, so that is in reference by, I think, I don't know, I don't think all of the records have one. Let me just see. Ben, I'm going to try and remember which one. Okay, can you find the Carabidi in the object groups? Oh, sorry. Actually, no, actually, it might be if you, yeah.
Can I just get rid of this getting started thing? This is driving me nuts. What am I looking for?
Carabidi.
Right.
Cool, if you expand that. And then under storage location reference, it should have
Storage location.
multimedia. Now, we should be able to demonstrate that. Yeah.
Here we go.
So if you click on one of those, so the only thing is I think we might have added the image after we did the snapshot for the demo, but actually, what have we got there?
Will an image show
So
up right here
it's-
in Airtable?
Just scroll up a bit. They add reference, so has reference. Sorry, it was at the bottom, Ben. All right, at the bottom of that set, above object group. Yeah,
Right.
and if you click add record under has reference.
Oh, look at that. Let's
there,
just do it.
so-
Yeah.
Yeah, just click one. Yeah. But then I think you need to set up on the form view a visualization of multimedia, but you can kind of link that in has reference. So
That's cool. So I can link that image.
yeah.
Where is that image? Is that on your server? So did you give it a URL, or is it? Do you upload it somewhere, or?
That I think is uploaded in Airtable, but you would be able to use a URI for that as well.
So if you're exporting it to somewhere else, that image doesn't go with it, or?
Yeah, you'd need to use a URI for an image.
That's a good question about does Airtable, how does it handle media uploads in bulk, right?
Yeah. Yeah. no, it is a
And
good
sorry,
question.
I've feeling a bit stupid in this thing, but the stuff that you've imported from Emu, you're adding to Airtable these images and the cabinet stuff. That's coming from. Is that coming from? What are you adding into the schema at this point, or what's been exported?
This has all been manually added. So Emu's just there to say that this collection is stored and managed in Emu. We've got a couple of collection management systems that are in use at NHM. So you potentially have multiple instances of collection management groups that are used in a collection. Emu's just here to say we're using this collection management system to manage this group of objects. It's not the source of the data in this instance.
Okay.
And no stupid questions. This is quite complicated. So we were trying to wrap our heads around like what would be a good way of like doing an initial demo. So you are all our guinea pigs today.
Well, let me ask you this. I can't see any hands. How many people, and honestly, feel they understand Latimer Core better after this past hour and 23 minutes.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, people are getting braver now. I would say 70% of the room.
That's pretty good. That's passing. Well, how many people feel they really know Latimer core now? Like they were confused and now they really have a decent understanding of it.
Got two, 3 hands.
That's pretty good. That's good.
We are using Latimer core for disco planners.
Mm-hmm.
Even if yes, so I'm from Belgium, so we are using Latimer core for disco Flanders, and of course, in a short workshop, you cannot grasp everything, but by experience, we can say by explaining it to the people, and especially if we work with institutions of which their main purpose is not collections, but they have, it helped a lot to explain them what is a collection, what metrics they should measure.
Mm-hmm.
So the challenge was not so much the standards, but that they didn't have the content and the metrics. So it helped them to understand what they should measure and how they should keep the collections. And especially to bring in new people, it's very handy, I found, to have also managed to have this dashboard of collections we didn't know much before we started Disco Flanders.
That's great, thanks. And if could we just get the mic to Marie? And actually, could you switch this computer back on? So Ben, I think you're good. I'm going to switch back to the presentation. So thank you ever so much for demoing live.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks. I also, to just pick up on what Patricia said, that do you have examples of metrics that you can make in Latimer core? Because my problem is like there's no metric defined in Latimer core. It's all measurement of X, and I'm afraid. No, actually, I know from looking at various places that everyone has their own sort of metrics, and it's very difficult to standardize and make anything out of it, because everyone has their own sort of little definitions. And I was wondering if there could be a way in Latimer core to like standardize the metrics in some ways, or I don't know, at least some of them, because otherwise it makes it very difficult to integrate in things like GR cycle, because like we cannot have an infinity of metrics. So yeah.
I tried to do that at one institution with 8 collections, trying to get the metrics all aligned so we all could be one report. I can only imagine what you have to deal with a GR cycle. It's very, very, there are ontologies, there are vocabularies out there for statistics that you could sort of, and you just got to get everybody on board. I mean, you could do number of loans last year, and then you're going to get the question, well, what is a loan? Okay. So at some point you have to draw the line somewhere, but there is a possibility of doing that, releasing recommended vocabularies for people.
That might be good to do, Ben. So as a kind of like thing to do next, and would be very up for thinking about that. And I certainly think for some of the national programs, that would be a really sensible thing to do. So would be very pro doing that. So I had a couple of other questions for you all. So again, a show of hands. How many of you think that Latimer core might be useful for you to use? Okay, that's a reasonable show of hands. And again, like for other folk in your organizations, do you think it'd be useful for them? Cool, maybe 50%. Anyone want to talk about any real world applications that they've kind of thought about that would be useful? Can I have the roaming mic? That one, cool. Cool, you got one in the back. Okay, cool. We'll just take could you pass it around?
We've been talking about this with Marie and GR Cycle, but for paleo collections, a lot of them already have like a stratigraphic inventory, and that is a very good way for researchers to find specimens, and Latimer core is the perfect way to share that information. So, thanks.
Cool. Ben, how are you getting on with the earth sciences stuff?
It's hit a bit of there are 24 hours in a day, and I need but it should pick up again pretty soon. To start moving. Mineralogy extension will be done by the end of the year. It's going to be a vocabulary enhancement, not a standard. And then geology is next, and the geology collection data model is in stasis at the moment, but I think I found a way to get it moving again. So it's coming along. But stratigraphic's great, even like geologic timescale. If you could have, the coverage of a collection on the geologic timescale, right? You could express that in some sort of manner. Would be helpful to people, and especially stratigraphy for sure. But it's coming along. There will be new terms added to Darwin Core if they're approved for geologic context, which will then cascade, we think, to Latimer Core. And I'm on the Latimer Core maintenance group. And so if I can propose my own terms, I guess, to the standard, but that's the general idea.
Cool. I'm just mindful of time here. So if anyone sticks around after break, I might talk to them about other applications. But in terms of finding out more about Latimer Core, so there is a wiki. We've got an official homepage on tadwig.org. And there's also a standards browser as well, which is quite handy. So you can kind of see how the terms are connected to each other with the term definitions. So I'd recommend that. Also wanted to say that if any of you want to get involved with biodiversity standards, if you go to tadwig.org/community, you can find out a bit more. And it is really important for all standards development that we have representation from a wide range of users. It's really important that standards development isn't just technically minded folk. It's about the users of the standards as well. So if you're interested, please check it out. Yeah, definitely don't need a deep understanding of data standards to start getting involved. And in terms of workshop materials, we've got the lesson data set up on Zenodo. That's got this presentation, the orientation and exercises document, the links to the base, documentation, and that kind of schema mapping as well. And I'd just like to give a shout out to the collections description group. So Latimer Core got where it is because of the hard work of all of these people. And again, a lot of people who kind of fed back into the review process. So developing a data standard is quite an involved process, isn't it, Ben?
Yes. And if you're interested in joining the maintenance group, please email me or email Matt or anybody that's on the maintenance group right now. We'd be happy to get you on board. And we meet, I think, monthly. So.
Yeah. But thanks, everyone. So I think that is now break time. I'll stick around for a bit. I would love to get your feedback on what we can do to help you to use Latimer Core more in the future. So we're thinking about maybe Latimer Core Hour, I think probably focusing on specific implementations of Latimer Core because it's so broad, thinking about like specific things like, I want to do X, how do I do it? Those kinds of questions would be very welcome. So please come and talk to me after the workshop during a break, because I would love to develop more specific focus things. We were kind of really struggling to think, okay, how do we get started with something really generic at Tadwig? So I appreciate it's been a bit chaotic. Thank you for sticking with us. Yeah, I'm very much up for more feedback on what we can do next. So thanks, everyone. And thank you, Ben.
Sure.
I thought it.
Run out because I was stuck in the car.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, that was okay.
Yeah, I think.
I think the demo worked really well. So yeah.
Well, I think you can always do things better, but I thought it's just a case of doing something with Latimer Core, and like I'm glad.